What if the Bible, was never complete? What if a story so dangerous, so shattering, was deliberately torn out, not to protect faith, but to protect power? The Book of Enoch was once revered, quoted by apostles, preserved in the oldest Christian traditions. And yet it was a race-branded heresy, buried in silence, almost lost forever. Ask yourself, why books vanish by accident? Manuscripts crumble with time. But Enoch was not forgotten. It was deliberately removed, excised like a cancer. Because its pages spoke of a rebellion in the heavens, of angels called watchers who defied their place, descended to earth and brought with them forbidden knowledge, sorcery, astrology, weapons, enchantments, even cosmetics. Knowledge that intoxicated humanity, knowledge that unbalanced creation itself. And from that union of divine and human came the Nephilim giants, with appetites so monstrous they devoured the world into blood and ash. The flood of Noah, sanitized in Sunday sermons as punishment for human sin. Was in Enoch a divine purge, cataclysm, to erase a corruption too vast, too unnatural, to be allowed to endure? This is why the book was cut from the canon, because it reveals that evil did not begin in a garden with a serpent. It began in heaven with angels. It tells us that the divine order is not unbreakable, that even those closest to God can fall, and that their fall reshaped the destiny of mankind. If this text had survived openly, religion as we know it would be unrecognizable. So they burned it, silenced it, erased it. But truth is not so easily destroyed. It survives in fragments, in whispers, in Ethiopia's churches, and now in your ears. The question is not why they erased it. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know it existed? The Book of Enoch was not simply forgotten. It was deliberately excised from the architecture of faith. To understand why, you must step into the world of councils and empires, where theology was less revelation than construction. In the centuries after Christ, Christianity began to crystallize under Roman power. Faith that once thrived in scattered communities, fueled by visions and apocryphal texts, was gathered like molten metal and poured into a single mold. The canon was forged not by divine decree, but by human hands, bishops, councils, emperors. And in that forging, some books were chosen and others discarded. Enoch was among those declared too dangerous, too destabilizing to remain. The architecture of evil is not in the Book of Enoch itself, but in the system that erased it. The councils at Nicaea, Laodicea, and Hippo debated which writings were divinely inspired. The criteria were not purity of vision or truth of prophecy, but usefulness what texts reinforced. Hierarchy, order, obedience. Enoch did none of these. Instead, it revealed cracks in heaven itself. It showed that angels could fall, that celestial beings could hunger, lust, rebel, that divine law was not immutable but fragile. Such a message left in the hands of ordinary believers would dissolve the aura of perfection upon which ecclesiastical power depended, so the machinery of suppression was activated. The book, once quoted in Jude and echoed in Peter, was denounced. Church fathers who had once respected it fell silent. Scribes omitted it from manuscripts. Councils consigned it to the shadows. And where suppression failed, fire completed the task. But like all forbidden knowledge, it did not vanish. It fled into Ethiopia, into a church beyond Rome's reach, preserved in Gia's script while Europe forgot. There, Enoch remained scripture, read aloud as sacred truth, while in the West it was condemned as poison. One world erased, another remembered. This duality reveals the architecture of evil at work. To strip away texts that speak of corruption in the heavens is not to protect faith, it is to protect power, because power thrives on silence. If believers knew that angels could fall, then no priest, no bishop, no emperor could claim infallibility. If divine messengers could rebel, then why not human rulers? Enoch was not merely inconvenient, it was destabilizing. It undermined the scaffolding of authority by showing that even the divine hierarchy was not absolute. Consider how the book itself is structured. It is not parables or moral fables, but a ledger of rebellion and judgment. It names Samyeza, Azazel, the watchers who descended, the knowledge they spread, the chaos they unleashed. It details the birth of Nephilim, giants who devoured everything. It portrays a flood not as divine disappointment in humanity, but as cosmic damage control, a purge of corruption that began in the heavens. In this architecture, evil is not human weakness. Alone it is divine contamination. This flips the entire edifice of theology. It means humanity is not merely sinner, but victim, infected by powers from above. That narrative could never coexist with a system built on blaming humans and demanding obedience. The suppression of Enoch also reveals something else: the fear of knowledge itself. The Watchers did not gift humanity with worship or liturgy. They gave them metallurgy, sorcery, enchantments, cosmetics, practical, dangerous, transformative skills. These were not meant to elevate the spirit, but to alter the material. And that is why the church recoiled. For a system designed to monopolize knowledge, to dole it out in sermons and sacraments, a book that declared angels once handed humanity forbidden arts was intolerable. It suggested that knowledge is not divine grace but contraband, smuggled into human hands by rebels. To admit this would unravel centuries of teaching that obedience, not curiosity, is the path to salvation. Look closer at the symbolism. In Genesis, the story of Eden condemns the pursuit of knowledge, the fruit that should not be eaten. In Enoch, the same theme returns, magnified. Knowledge is gift, knowledge is corruption, knowledge is catastrophe. And yet, in both the message is the same. Curiosity leads to downfall. But what if the architecture of evil is not curiosity itself, but the system that convinces you to fear it? What if the suppression of Enoch was not to protect souls, but to chain them, to keep them from glimpsing a truth, to destabilizing, to control? The proof lies in Ethiopia. While Rome buried the text, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it as scripture. They did not collapse into chaos. They did not become demonic. Instead, they carried Enoch as sacred for centuries. This exposes the Western suppression as deliberate choice, not necessity. A system that insists the book is heretical, while another calls it holy, reveals the subjective machinery of canon making. And once you see that, entire architecture of religious authority begins to look less like revelation and more like engineering. The Book of Enoch is a case study in how power handles dangerous truths. It erases them, not because they are false, but because they are uncontainable. The Watchers' descent, the Nephilim's birth, the forbidden knowledge, they are not condemned for lack of divinity. They are condemned because they open doors no authority can close. They suggest that divinity itself can fracture, that evil can wear angelic wings, that humanity's suffering is not always self-inflicted but imposed from above. This is the inversion that terrified councils and emperors. This is why the book had to be erased. But erasure does not destroy, buries. And buried things have a way of returning, sharper, hungrier, more dangerous for being silenced. Enoch's survival in Ethiopia, its rediscovery in the 18th century, its resurgence in modern esoteric circles, these are cracks in the architecture of suppression. Cracks that reveal the system is not unbreakable. The forbidden can be forgotten, but it cannot be killed. It waits, like the Watchers in their chains, for the day when silence breaks. And so we arrive at the paradox. The Book of Enoch was erased to protect power, but its survival proves that power is never absolute. The architecture of evil is vast, but it is fragile. One forbidden book, one dangerous truth, can topple the illusion of perfection. And once toppled, no amount of councils, creeds, or flames can restore the silence. The Book of Enoch does not whisper in gentle metaphors. It speaks in symbols sharp enough to cut, names heavy enough to fracture heaven's illusion of perfection. This is what made it dangerous, not only its story, but the way it encoded rebellion into a symbolic language that could not be mistaken for parable, like the sanitized narratives preserved in the canon. Enoch dared to name the Watchers Samyeza, Azazel, Arachiel, Kokabal. Each name was a wound carved into the supposed purity of the heavens. By naming, Enoch gave form. By giving form, he made denial impossible. Symbols are not mere decoration in this text. They are living technologies. When Enoch records that the Watchers taught humanity the cutting of roots or the use of metals, he is not describing innocent skills, but symbolic gateways. Roots are not just plants, they are veins of the earth. Lifelines of nature severed and manipulated. Metals are not just tools, or the bones of the world, smelted into weapons that shift the balance of power. Every gift is also a curse, every symbol a double-edged key. To a controlled hierarchy, these symbols were toxic because they bypassed mediation. They taught mortals to act without priest, without temple, without permission. Look at how these forbidden teachings mirror symbols we still use. Astrology, the mapping of stars into destinies, is one of the oldest symbolic systems. A cosmic language that reduces the infinite heavens into patterns readable by human eyes. Cosmetics painting the face, adorning the body, may seem trivial. But in Enoch, they are symbols of disguise, transformation, power through illusion. Sorcery and enchantment are not only spells, but the manipulation of meaning, words as sigils that bend perception. These are not isolated teachings. They are symbols encoded into culture, surviving in altered form. We still wear makeup, read horoscopes, wield weapons forged from the earth's veins. The symbols persist, even when the text that revealed them was erased. The danger is in the recognition. Once you see these patterns as symbols, the world transforms. The Watcher's gifts become rituals woven into daily life. Proof that forbidden knowledge never truly disappeared was absorbed. And this is why Enoch had to be suppressed. Because to admit these symbols came from angels was to admit that the sacred and the profane are intertwined, that heaven itself handed down the tools of corruption. Such a vision destabilizes the binary of good and evil. It says that light gave birth to shadow, that even the divine can seed destruction. Consider the Nephilim, the monstrous children of these unions. They are not merely described as giants, but as devourers, symbols of appetite without limit. Their bodies become metaphors for empires vast, insatiable, consuming livestock, crops, even human flesh. To read them symbolically is to recognize empire itself as Nephilim-born, structures that feed endlessly until collapse. The Book of Enoch dares to say, what no empire wants, acknowledge that domination is monstrous, that conquest is not divine destiny, but hybrid corruption. The Nephilim are not only bodies, they are systems. Even the flood takes on symbolic weight. It is not simply water covering earth, but a cosmic reset, a ritual cleansing to erase contamination. In this lens, the flood becomes a baptism magnified to apocalyptic scale. Humanity does not just suffer punishment. The earth itself undergoes purification. The symbol is brutal, but clear. When divine order collapses, nature itself must rise to wash away the infection. The symbolic language of Enoch reaches beyond theology. In occult traditions, naming is always power. To name a demon is to bind it. To inscribe a sigil is to create a channel. Enoch does both. By recording the names of the Watchers, he preserves their memory as forces still lurking. By describing their gifts, he encodes technologies that transcend time. This is why mystics and secret societies centuries later clung to the text. They did not see it as myth, but as cipher, a key to unlock forbidden currents still pulsing beneath history. And what of Azazel, singled out in the text as the one who taught men to forge weapons and women to adorn themselves? His name becomes symbolic of corruption through craft, the blending of beauty and violence. To the Inquisition, this was intolerable. To admit Azazel's influence was to admit that war and vanity, twin engines of human history, were not human inventions at all, but legacies of fallen angels. Imagine the danger of that realization: empires built on war, economies built on adornment, all traced back to a cosmic rebellion. It reframes human civilization not as progress, but as infection. The suppression of Enoch, then, was an attempt to silence a symbolic language to revealing. But symbols cannot be killed. They resurface, disguised. The Nephilim become titans in Greece, Rakshasas in India, Jotnar in Norse sagas. The Watchers become Anunnaki in Sumer, sky gods in Mesoamerica, shining ones in Celtic lore. Different names, same patterns. The language of symbols crosses cultures because truth, once encoded, cannot be erased. It migrates. It's even today, the echoes remain. Corporations raise logos like sigils. Nations march beneath flags like ritual banners. The very systems of control that suppressed Enoch use the same symbolic mechanisms the Watchers once gave. The irony is staggering. The institutions that condemned forbidden knowledge now depend on its structures. The church that feared astrology builds calendars by stars. The governments that demonize sorcery weaponize words as propaganda. The cosmetics once branded corruption now fuel billion-dollar industries. The forbidden is everywhere, camouflaged as normalcy. This is the power of Enoch's symbolic language, strips away the disguise. Once you see cosmetics as ritual mask, weapons as sacrificial tools, astrology as cosmic programming, the illusion of neutrality shatters. You realize you're already living in a world shaped by Watchers. And that realization is dangerous because it awakens autonomy. You are no longer a passive subject in systems of control. You are a reader of symbols, a decipherer of hidden codes. You begin to see reality itself as ritual script. That is the terror and the liberation of the Book of Enoch. It teaches not only that heaven can fall, but that symbols never die. They embed themselves into culture, into psyche, into ritual, waiting for those who dare to read them. The Watchers may be chained, but their language is free, etched into the world around us. And once you recognize it, you can never look away. From the first pages of the Book of Enoch, blood rises like a crimson thread, binding heaven and earth together. The Watchers descend, not merely to lust after human women, but to seed something unnatural, something that corrupts the balance of creation itself. Their children, the Nephilim, embody this corruption. They are described not as noble demigods, but as predators whose hunger knew no limits. They devoured livestock, crops, even human flesh, until the world itself groaned beneath the weight of their appetite. In this imagery, blood becomes more than a detail, it becomes currency. It is the cost of forbidden knowledge, the payment extracted for every secret given, the medium through which rebellion carves its mark into the world. Blood in this text is not symbolic alone, it is literal sacrifice. When the Nephilim consumed the earth, they turned creation into a temple of slaughter. Every field became an altar, every village a ritual site, every river a channel carrying red payment back to the heavens. The implication is stark. The gifts of the Watchers could not be received without cost. Weapons forged, enchantments cast, cosmetics worn, all of it demanded blood downstream. Knowledge was not free, was a loan paid back in violence. But blood in Enoch also functions as metaphor, as the oldest unit of spiritual economy. It is time, life force, essence. When angels taught metallurgy, the cost was not only flesh consumed by war, but generations bound to conflict. When they gave astrology, the cost was human agency surrendered to stars and signs. Every gift carried a hidden invoice written in red. This is why the flood was not simply judgment, but repayment, a divine attempt to balance the books of creation by erasing the debt of blood that had grown unbearable. Think of how this resonates with broader myth. In Babylon, sacrifices of blood were required to feed gods. In Greece, heroes shed blood for glory, each death a transaction with Olympus. In Christianity itself, the crucifixion is framed as ultimate sacrifice, the blood of Christ as payment for humanity's sins. Enoch sits within this global pattern, but it sharpens the edge. It dares to say that blood was spilled not only by man, but by the direct interference of heaven. That the debt humanity carried was seeded not by Adam's fall, but by angelic rebellion. The role of Azazel illustrates this economy vividly. He taught men the art of war, to forge weapons from earth's bones. Once swords were raised, blood became inevitable. Every battle, every conquest, every empire built on corpses is traced back to that moment of forbidden teaching. Azazel's gift carried no upfront cost, but the interest compounded endlessly, paid with rivers of red. That is why in Enoch, Azazel is cast into chains beneath the desert until judgment. He is not punished merely for rebellion, but for bankrupting creation, flooding it with unpayable debt. There is also the intimate layer of blood, the mingling of divine and human flesh. The Watchers entered into covenants with human women, not contracts written in ink, but sealed in flesh and womb. The offspring that resulted were not children of love, but of transaction, living embodiments of pacts signed in blood. They were monstrous because they were debts incarnate existences that could not be reconciled with divine or human order. Their very lives were proof that blood is the oldest currency, one that cannot be forged or faked. And what of the flood? It was not merely water, but liquidation, a cosmic reset designed to wash away debt that could never be repaid. The screams of humanity, crushed under Nephilim tyranny, rose like incense into heaven. The earth itself was polluted by bloodshed. Creation cried out, demanding balance. In this sense, the flood was less judgment and more economic correction. A divine bankruptcy court, dissolving a debt written in veins and rivers. Yet blood as currency did not end with the flood. The spirits of the Nephilim, Enoch says, lingered. Their bodies destroyed, their souls remained as restless demons. Here, blood becomes their sustenance. Cut off from heaven and earth, they hunger eternally for essence, haunting humans to drink the vitality they no longer possess. Demonic possession, in this lens, is not random cruelty, but parasitic economies, the spirits of the Nephilim feeding on human life force to sustain their cursed half-existence. Even now, blood is the coin they crave. Look to our modern world and you see the pattern persist. Nations wage wars, spilling blood for resources and power. Corporations drain time and energy, the modern distillation of blood from millions in exchange for survival. We rarely see the crimson, but the principle is unchanged. Blood remains the measure of value, whether it flows in veins or in hours surrendered. The Book of Enoch does not invent this economy. It reveals it. It tells us bluntly, nothing comes without blood. Every gift, every rebellion, every empire exacts its price. This truth is what made the text intolerable to early authorities. To preach that God demands sacrifice is one thing. To admit that heaven itself ceded blood debt is another. Shifts responsibility, reframing evil not as human rebellion alone, but as cosmic contamination. That admission would shatter the neat architecture of blame upon which obedience was built. Better, then, to erase Enoch, to bury his ledger of blood, than to allow believers to glimpse how deep the currency ran. The symbolism grows darker when you consider Enoch's parallels with alchemy. In Hermetic texts, the red stage of alchemical transformation, the rubidoa is achieved only through dissolution, through symbolic blood. Transformation requires death, destruction, sacrifice. The Watcher's knowledge was alchemical in this sense, powerful, transformative, but purchased with ruin. The Nephilim were not only monsters of flesh, but embodiments of failed transmutation, matter distorted because the price was not rightly paid. So we return to the haunting truth. Blood is the oldest currency. It is the language of sacrifice, the medium of covenant, the inevitable cost of power. The Book of Enoch dares to reveal that this law is not human invention, but cosmic principle, older than scripture, older than empires. And it forces us to ask, whose blood are we still paying with? If the Watcher's rebellion echoes in our wars, our technologies, our obsessions, then perhaps the debt has never been settled. Perhaps the world is still bleeding for a transaction made in heaven long ago. Every forbidden tale circles back to an agreement. Behind every rebellion, behind every act of transgression, there is a pact. The Book of Enoch presents this truth in its most terrifying form. The Watchers did not fall by accident. Their descent was not a moment of weakness, but a covenant sealed in secrecy. Enoch tells us that 200 angels, led by Samyeza, gathered on Mount Hermon. There, they swore an oath together, binding themselves so that none could turn back alone. It was not lust alone that pulled them down from heaven, it was contract. The Watchers understood the weight of their choice, and they chose to share it, each swearing upon the others, binding their rebellion into a pact as strong as chains. This is the architecture of forbidden power. Pact, offering, consequence. The Watchers entered into agreement with humankind, written in ink, but sealed in blood and womb. They took wives, shared secrets, and in return received devotion, children, worship. These were not random unions, but contracts disguised as desire. Humanity gained knowledge. The Watchers gained presence on earth. But every pact carried a clause, and the clause was catastrophe. Their children, the Nephilim, were the fine print, a consequence too great to bear, yet inescapable once the pact was signed. Azazel's role sharpens this truth. He's depicted as the great teacher, revealing metallurgy, weapon-making, sorcery, ornamentation. At first glance, these seem like gifts. But each gift was a contract. To learn the forging of swords is to agree to a world where blood must be spilled. To adorn the body with paints and metals is to accept a world of vanity, seduction, and manipulation. To study enchantment is to surrender to forces unseen. Azazli's teachings were bargains, cloaked as blessings, and humanity accepted them without reading the cost. This logic is mirrored across myth. Faust's deal with Mephistopheles, the witch's oath to the devil. Even the biblical covenant with Godol are contracts that bind both giver and receiver. The difference is that in Enoch, the pact was not with demons masquerading as gods, but with angels themselves. The implication is staggering. The first demonic contracts were written not in hell, but in heaven. What makes this terrifying is how familiar it feels. Look around and you see the same pattern repeated. Modern life is saturated with contracts, legal, financial, social. A loan signed today is a pact promising future labor. A job contract exchanges hours of life force for survival. Even digital platforms bind us with invisible agreements, trading privacy and autonomy for convenience. These are secular grimoires, written not in arcane Latin but in corporate jargon, yet the principle is the same. Ask, offer, bind, pay. The Watcher's rebellion simply exposed the spiritual root of what we still live every day. The most sinister element of pacts is their permanence. Once sworn, they bind beyond intention. The Watchers swore together not to abandon the plan, ensuring that even if some regretted, none could withdraw. Humanity, once taught forbidden knowledge, could not return to innocence. A contract once signed rewires reality. This is why pacts terrifying, why institutions rely on them. They reshape destiny, turning choices into cages. Enoch's account of the Watcher's plea for forgiveness highlights another dimension. After judgment was pronounced, they begged Enoch to intercede, to renegotiate the contract. But the covenant they made was too binding. Their pact had consequences not even heaven would overturn. They had written themselves into doom, and the price could not be reversed. This is the ultimate lesson of Enoch. Pacts once entered must be paid in full, whether in generations of blood, chains in the abyss, or floods that wash away entire worlds. This makes the book not merely a record of rebellion, but a manual of spiritual contracts. Each story is a cautionary clause. Each fallen angel, a reminder of what happens when power is sought without measure. But it is also a mirror. For we to make pacts daily, some conscious, some hidden, we sign away time, freedom, integrity, for comfort or survival. The question the 9 gates asked in whispers, Enoch declares in thunder. Do you understand the contracts you are signing? The church feared this aspect most of all. Her entire structure depended on mediating contracts, confession for forgiveness, tithe for blessing, obedience for salvation. To expose that angels themselves had entered illicit pacts with humanity was to reveal that covenant itself could be corrupted, that the spiritual economy was not secure, that heaven itself was negotiable. Such knowledge would erode the monopoly of the pulpit, so Enoch was buried, because its contracts could not be controlled. But the echoes of those pacts remain. In occult traditions, summoning rituals still function as negotiations. The magician draws a circle, offers incense, blood, or words, and in return, demands service. Each is an echo of Mount Hermon, a reenactment of the Watcher's oath. Even in secular culture, contracts are framed as sacred. To break them is to invite chaos, lawsuits, curses. The principle has not changed. A pact is more than agreement. It is reality rewritten. So the Book of Enoch forces us into confrontation. Every gift, every bargain, every promise carries a hidden clause. The Watchers bound themselves to lust and knowledge and birthed ruin. Humanity bound itself to their gifts and inherited endless conflict. To awaken to this truth is to see the world differently. Every contract becomes a spell, every signature a ritual, every bargain a gate. The question is no longer whether you are bound, it is what you are bound to, and whether you are willing to pay the price. The Book of Enoch is terrifying not simply because it speaks of angels falling or giants devouring. It is terrifying because it inverts the entire moral code on which religion, empire, and obedience were built. What had always been presented as flawless, incorruptible, and divine is suddenly revealed as fragile, flawed, and corruptible. The Watchers are not demons lurking at the edges of heaven. They are angels entrusted with guardianship, transformed into transgressors by desire. If the guardians can betray their charge, then what certainty is left for those who obey? This inversion is deliberate. In the canonical Bible, evil enters through a serpent, a creature framed as deceitful, opposed to divine order. In Enoch, evil enters through angels themselves, the very symbols of purity and light. The Watchers were meant to be protectors, yet they became predators. Their fall turns the moral order upside down. No longer is evil something external creeping from the shadows. It is internal, rising from within the very hierarchy that claims perfection. For a church seeking to consolidate control, this truth was intolerable. It meant that obedience to authority could never guarantee safety because authority itself was capable of corruption. Each act of the Watchers functions as an inversion. Teaching humanity astrology transformed the heavens from a symbol of divine order into a field of manipulation. Teaching sorcery and enchantment turned words meant to praise the divine to weapons of control. Teaching metallurgy inverted the bones of the earth into blades that spilled blood. Even cosmetics, seemingly trivial, inverted beauty from a reflection of divine creation into a mask, a tool of seduction and illusion. These inversions do not only corrupt, they expose the fragility of moral categories themselves. The Nephilim sharpen the paradox. They are born not of demonic rebellion, but of angelic desire. They are monsters birthed not from hell, but from heaven. Their very existence declares that purity, once broken, breeds corruption more terrifying than any external enemy. The Nephilim are living blasphemy, the children of heaven's disobedience. They invert the concept of lineage itself, proving that divine blood does not guarantee sanctity, it can generate horror. This moral inversion ripples through history. When priests claim to embody holiness, Enoch whispers that angels once fell. When kings declared divine right, Enoch reminds us that heavenly rulers once broke their own law. When empires justify conquest as God's will, Enoch tells us that warfare itself was taught by rebels in disguise. In this way, the text dismantles every appeal to authority, showing that authority is not inherently righteous, but vulnerable to corruption at its very core. It is no coincidence that later traditions connected Azazel with scapegoat rituals, casting sins onto him and sending him into the wilderness. Azazel is not only a fallen angel. He is the embodiment of inversion, the reminder that what is framed as divine law can be twisted into demonic teaching. By teaching humanity to make weapons, Azazel inverted creation itself, turning the tools of survival into tools of annihilation. His punishment chains until judgment reflects not just his crime, but the system's terror at what he represents. He proves that the line between divine and demonic is not fixed. It can be crossed. This is why Enoch's testimony was erased, stripped away the comfort of absolutes. The official narrative depends on polarity. God versus devil, angels versus demons, heaven versus hell. But Enoch collapses those binaries. It insists that angels can become demons, that heaven can birth corruption, that evil can descend, wearing wings of light. Such inversion is uncontainable because it breeds suspicion. If heaven can fall, then how can any authority, religious or political, claim infallibility? The inversion also touches the human condition. In most traditions, humans are the source of sin, always in need of correction. But in Enoch, humanity is contaminated by celestial transgression. The fall is not ours alone. We are not merely guilty. We are victims of a cosmic betrayal. This reversal strips away the theological weapon used for centuries to keep people obedient. If the original corruption comes from above, then obedience below loses its legitimacy. That is the true threat, the realization that guilt has been misassigned for millennia. Yet there is another layer. The inverted moral code is not simply destructive, it is revelatory. By exposing corruption in heaven, Enoch invites us to integrate the truth, that light and shadow are inseparable. The Watchers are not cautionary tales about monsters. They are archetypes of our own divided nature. Desire, ambition, rebellion, these forces condemned as sins are revealed as part of the cosmic order itself. They cannot be erased, they must be confronted. The inversion does not abolish morality, it demands a deeper one that acknowledges shadow instead of denying it. This is why the Book of Enoch resonates with occult traditions that embrace the adversary not as enemy, but as examiner. The adversary tests, pushes, exposes. The Watchers embody this role. They show that true growth comes not from blind obedience, but from confrontation with corruption, even when that corruption wears the face of the sacred. Lucifer in later traditions carries the same archetype, the light-bringer who rebels, the fallen who illuminates. The inversion reveals a hidden law. Only through rebellion do we discover autonomy. Only through shadow do we find sovereignty. The flood, too, becomes inverted. Instead of humanity punished for disobedience, the flood is framed as divine retribution against divine corruption. It is less about sin below than rebellion above. The waters wash not only human wickedness, but angelic contamination. This shifts the moral lesson entirely. Humanity is not condemned for failing. God is nearly annihilated for hosting gods who failed themselves. Such inversion dismantles the moral architecture of obedience and replaces it with a stark, dangerous clarity that power, no matter how high, can fall. And this is where Enoch's voice grows most unsettling. He does not present these revelations as allegory. He records them as witness. He walked with God, spoke with angels, and still dared to write of their fall. He did not soften the inversion into parable, but preserved it as fact. This act itself was rebellion against the system of silence. Enoch inverted the role of prophet from mouthpiece of authority to chronicler of corruption. That inversion was unforgivable. The inverted moral code of Enoch does not offer comfort. It offers confrontation. It tells us that purity is fragile, that authority is not absolute, that the divine is not beyond corruption. It asks us to stop worshiping binaries and start confronting paradox. To accept that heaven can fall is to accept that light and darkness are inseparable threads in the fabric of reality. And once you see this, obedience dies. Fear collapses. The systems built on purity and obedience shatter. That is why they erased the book. Not because it lied, but because it told too much of the truth. When you step into the pages of Enoch, you realize the rituals of the Watchers did not vanish with the flood. They survived, transmuted, hidden in plain sight. The book describes forbidden knowledge passed down in fragments: metallurgy, enchantments, astrology, cosmetics. At first glance, these look like tools, skills, technologies. But seen through the lens of ritual, they are ceremonies and disguise acts that bind, transform, and command reality itself. The terrifying truth is that the rituals seeded by the Watchers have never left us. They have become the scaffolding of civilization. Take metallurgy. In Enoch, Azazel is condemned for teaching men how to forge weapons, how to shape Earth's bones into blades. This is not just technology. It's ritual sacrifice systematized. Every war since is a reenactment of that forbidden initiation. The battlefield is the altar, the soldier, the priest, the blood spilled the offering. Humanity calls it strategy, empire, or defense. But Enoch would call it liturgy, ritual violence performed in honor of a pact struck long ago on Mount Hermon. Consider astrology. What the Watchers handed down was not mere stargazing, but a map of fate, a cosmic ritual that turned the heavens into a script for human behavior. To read the constellations, to predict seasons, to assign destiny based on planetary movement, these are acts of ritual alignment. Even today, we still check horoscopes, still whisper of Mercury in retrograde, still time our actions according to celestial rhythm. In this sense, we are all participants in a Watcher's ritual, repeating a ceremony older than Scripture, dressed in the harmless costume of entertainment. Cosmetics may seem trivial, but in Enoch, they are framed as corruption. Painting the face, adorning the body, transforming appearance, these are ritual masks, ceremonies of identity. They shift how others perceive, how power flows. In every culture, from priests anointing themselves with oils to rulers crowning themselves in gold, the act of adornment is ritual, a manipulation of perception. The Watchers revealed this secret, and humanity embraced it. Today, entire industries revolve around this ritual technology. Every advertisement for beauty products is a sermon of the Watchers, reminding us that power can be conjured through surface transformation. Even enchantment and sorcery, condemned as blasphemy, survive in altered forms. Words as spells, chants as incantations. Repeated phrases designed to shape thought, these rituals persist in politics, in advertising, in religion itself. The Watchers showed humanity that language can be weapon, that rhythm and repetition can alter minds. When crowds chant slogans in stadiums, when congregations repeat creeds, when consumers hum jingles without realizing it is ritual, and ritual is everywhere. This is the true danger of Enoch's testimony. It unmasks civilization as a chain of rituals rooted in forbidden origins. The flood may have washed the Nephilim from the earth, but it did not erase the ceremonies, only scattered them into human culture, where they survive, disguised as normality, war, commerce, entertainment. Worship hall are echoes of rituals handed down by angels who were never meant to share them. Institutions fear this revelation because it collapses the illusion of uniqueness. Religion wants you to believe its liturgy is sacred, distinct, divinely ordained. Governments want you to believe their ceremonies, oaths, parades, elections are secular and rational. Corporations want you to believe their symbols are mere logos, their campaigns mere marketing. But peel back the mask, and you see the same structure. Symbol, repetition, sacrifice, transformation. It is ritual, whether sung in a cathedral, chanted at a rally, or whispered in a boardroom. The Book of Enoch does not present ritual as optional. It shows that ritual is the engine of reality. The Watchers corrupted it, yes, but they also revealed its inevitability. To exist is to participate in rituals. The only question is whose rituals you obey. Are you bending to ceremonies written by others' priests, kings, corporations, or are you writing your own? This is why the text had to be buried. Because if humans realized that rituals are not only external, but internal, not only collective, but personal, the monopoly of power would collapse. Even the flood itself, the Great Purge, was a ritual. A cosmic baptism, a cleansing sacrifice on a planetary scale. The waters washed the corruption away, just as fire and blood washed altars in later religions. The structure is the same: imbalance answered by ritual destruction, chaos met with ceremonial reset. God's judgment, in this lens, becomes ritual writ large, proving that even the divine participates in the same cycle the Watchers revealed. The haunting implication is that ritual cannot be escaped, it can only be reclaimed. Enoch does not suggest we abandon ritual, he shows us the cost of letting it be written for us. The Watchers wrote rituals of hunger, vanity, domination. Institutions rewrote them into creeds of obedience. But hidden between the lines lies an invitation to author your own, to consecrate your own symbols, to direct your own sacrifices. To awaken is not to leave ritual, but to choose it consciously. This recognition is unsettling because it forces us to see the world differently. That anthem before a sporting event is not entertainment, is invocation. A brand logo flashing on a screen is not marketing, it is a sigil. An oath sworn in a courtroom is not legal. Formality, it is covenant. The 9 gates whispered this truth in shadow. Enoch shouts it in thunder. Rituals are everywhere, and they are shaping us whether we know it or not. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The world stops being neutral and becomes a liturgy in motion. Every gesture, every chant, every symbol reveals its true nature. A fragment of the Watcher's legacy. It a piece of the forbidden woven into the fabric of daily life. That is the gift and the curse of Enoch. He does not let us look away. He forces us to recognize the rituals we live inside. And in doing so, he hands us a choice. Continue to be shaped by rituals you do not question, or step forward as author of your own. To read the Book of Enoch is to feel the walls of the world shift. Once its words enter you, there is no returning to the comfort of innocence. Awakening to the system means realizing that what you thought was divine perfection was, and always has been, a carefully edited narrative. The canon you were given is not the whole story. It is a construction, a stage set designed to keep you obedient. Behind it, hidden like scaffolding beneath a cathedral's facade, lies the machinery of suppression. Enoch's erasure was not an accident, it was part of the system, the architecture of control. Awakening is painful because it unravels the illusion of stability. You were taught that evil came from human weakness, that sin began in a garden, that heaven was unbreakable. Enoch whispers otherwise. Evil did not begin on earth. It began above, when angels betrayed their place. Sin was not solely human, it was seeded by Watchers, amplified by forbidden knowledge, and embodied in the Nephilim. The flood was not simply punishment, Tit was a cosmic reset, a desperate attempt to cleanse a contamination heaven itself had unleashed. When you realize this, the neat structure of blame collapses. Humanity is no longer the sole sinner. Heaven is no longer spotless. The binary crumbles, and with it, the authority built upon it. The system depends on binaries: good versus evil, heaven versus hell, obedience versus rebellion. These opposites create control because if people believe goodness always wears the face of authority, they will submit. But Enoch destroys this illusion, shows that angels can rebel, that heaven can fracture, that corruption wears the mask of light. Awakening means you see authority differently. Priests, kings, rulers, Saul claimed divine mandate. But if angels themselves once defiled creation, then what claim does any earthly authority have to infallibility? The system trembles when that question takes root. The most haunting aspect of awakening is that you begin to see the patterns repeating. The forbidden knowledge of the Watcher's metallurgy, enchantment, astrology has not disappeared. It has simply been rebranded. Today we call it technology, science, entertainment. But the structure is the same. Knowledge gifted without cost, followed by hidden consequences. Nuclear power, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. These are our modern Watcher's gifts. Dazzling, yet dangerous, irresistible, yet corrupting. And just as in Enoch's time, the price will be blood. Floods may no longer be water alone. They may be collapse, war, or ecological ruin. Awakening is realizing that the same pattern continues, dressed in new symbols. The system thrives because most remain asleep. They chant slogans without thought, kneel in rituals without awareness, obey laws without question. They are bound by contracts they did not read, living inside ceremonies they do not recognize. The Book of Enoch cracks this trance. It forces the reader to see the invisible strings, the hidden machinery. Once you know that even scripture has been edited, you begin to wonder what else has been erased, altered, silenced. How much of history is narrative, not truth? How much of your daily life is programming, not choice? This is the beginning of awakening, the uncomfortable recognition that reality itself has been scripted. But awakening is not liberation by default. It is disorientation, collapse, exposure. It feels like standing in ruins after a temple has burned. The chants are gone, the walls are gone, the altar is gone. You are left alone, raw, without certainty. No institution will comfort you, no priest will absolve you. You face the abyss with nothing but your own will. This is why most who glimpse the truth retreat. They seal the book, call it heresy, and return to the safety of illusions. But for those who endure, awakening becomes transformation. The system fears this endurance most of all, because an awakened soul cannot be ruled by fear. You cannot terrify someone with hell once they know heaven itself has fallen. You cannot control someone with purity once they have seen that purity births corruption. You cannot shame someone with sin once they realize sin was seated by angels. Awakening breaks the monopoly of control, and once broken, it cannot be rebuilt. This is why Enoch had to be buried, why its pages had to be silenced. It was not just a book. It was a key that could unlock mass awakening, and yet silence is never perfect. The text survived in Ethiopia, resurfaced in Europe centuries later, and now spreads again in whispers and digital echoes. Every time it is read, a spark ignites. Some sparks fade, but others grow into flames. Awakening is contagious. It spreads not through sermons, but through recognition, not through obedience, but through questioning. The Watchers may be chained, but their legacy of rebellion lives on in every soul that dares to see differently. This is the final cruelty of awakening. Once you see, you cannot unsee. The system does not dissolve overnight. It still surrounds your rituals, contracts, illusions, but they no longer hold the same power. You recognize them as constructs, not absolutes. The anthem is no longer sacred, it's invocation. The law is no longer divined as contract. The sermon is no longer truth, that is narrative. The veil is gone and the machinery stands exposed. And once exposed, it can be dismantled. The Book of Enoch does not free you by comforting you, it frees you by unsettling you. It strips away innocence, shatters binaries, and leaves you with the raw, terrifying awareness that you were born inside a system designed to blind you. Awakening means facing this without flinching. It means refusing to close the book, refusing to forget, refusing to kneel to illusions. It means embracing the paradox, that you are both victim and sovereign, bound and free, fallen and rising. And so the question echoes at the threshold of the final gate. Now that you have awakened, what will you do with the vision? You deny it and return to sleep? Or will you walk forward, even if it leads into shadow, even if it demands everything you are? For the system is vast, but it is fragile, and one awakened soul is enough to fracture it. The Book of Enoch was erased to silence rebellion, but its words endure, whispering of watchers. Nephilim, and the flood that never truly ended. If their fall reshaped the world once, what if they are still among us? Leave your thoughts below, and subscribe. Our descent into forbidden truth continues.